The school auditorium was buzzing with noise that morning. Students moved in and out of the big hall, helping with stage lights, adjusting chairs, or chatting about who would win the upcoming talent show. Posters were hanging on the walls, some slightly crooked, showing the names of participants, singers, dancers, magicians, and even a small group calling themselves the Cool Boys Band. No one noticed the quiet girl sitting alone in the corner near the stage steps. She held a small notebook on her lap, flipping its pages nervously. Her name was written at the bottom of the list, last performer of the day. Most students didn't even know who she was. Some thought she was new, others assumed she was too shy to talk. She had always been the one sitting at the back of the classroom, eyes down, never raising her hand even when she knew the answer. She wasn't the kind of student who stood out. Her clothes were plain, her hair often tied carelessly, and she spoke so softly that teachers had to lean forward to hear her. But behind that silence, she carried something she never showed anyone, a secret that had shaped every quiet hour of her life. For her, music wasn't just sound. It was escape. It was comfort. It was the only thing that made her feel like she belonged somewhere. That morning, as she waited for her turn, she could already feel her stomach twist. She had never played in front of anyone before. Not her classmates, not even her teachers. The only person who had ever listened to her play was her mother, who often came home late from work, tired but still asking to hear just one song before bed. At home, they didn't have much. A small apartment on the top floor of an old building. The wallpaper was peeling in some corners and the kitchen light flickered whenever it rained. But in the corner of the living room sat a second-hand keyboard, the kind with missing keys and uneven sound, a gift from her late father. He had found it at a thrift store years ago, telling her it was just waiting for the right hands to bring it back to life. She remembered that day clearly. He'd smiled as she pressed a few keys, and though the sound came out cracked and broken, his eyes lit up. "See," he said softly, "it's not about perfect notes. It's about what you feel when you play." Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. Since then, she practiced every evening, sometimes for hours. She didn't have a teacher or sheet music. She learned by watching videos on her old phone and listening carefully. She played by ear, repeating melodies until they sounded right. The neighbors occasionally knocked on the wall, annoyed by the noise, but she didn't stop. The piano wasn't noise to her. It was her way of speaking when words failed. Back at school, the talent show had become a big deal over the years. Everyone wanted to be noticed. The loudest students usually won, those with flashy acts or funny performances. Nobody expected a quiet girl to even participate. When she signed up a week ago, the teacher had raised an eyebrow. "You're performing?" he asked in surprise. She only nodded and said softly, "Yes, piano." Some classmates overheard and giggled. "Piano? Does she even know how to play?" one whispered. Another shrugged. "Maybe she'll press random buttons. At least that'll be funny." She heard them but pretended she didn't. She had learned to ignore whispers like that. She had heard them all her life. Now as she sat backstage, the sound of laughter and clapping echoed through the hall. Performers went one after another. A girl dancing to a pop song, a boy performing a comedy skit, a group doing a clumsy magic trick. The audience clapped politely for each act, but it was mostly for fun. She kept her notebook close. Inside it were sketches of pianos, small lyrics she wrote, and lines like, "Don't stop. One day they'll listen." Her mother had said the same thing last night before leaving for her night shift. "Play with your heart," she said. "You don't have to impress anyone. Just be yourself." When her turn finally came, her legs felt heavy. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "And next we have, our final performance, a piano piece by..." He paused, trying to remember her name. "By her." The audience chuckled lightly at his hesitation. She stood up slowly and walked toward the stage. Every step sounded louder than it should. Her shoes made a soft tapping sound on the wooden floor. Some students whispered again, thinking she'd forget the notes or freeze on stage. The piano was waiting for her in the center, a little old but shining under the bright lights. She could see her reflection faintly on its polished surface. Her hands were trembling. For a moment she wanted to turn back. Then she remembered her father's words again. "It's not about perfect notes. It's about what you feel." She sat down on the small bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The microphone made a small feedback squeak. The room was filled with faint murmurs. Someone coughed. Someone laughed quietly. She closed her eyes. For a few seconds, she just breathed, slowly, deeply, until she could no longer hear the noise around her. All she heard was the soft hum of the piano beneath her fingertips. She pressed the first key. A clear, calm note filled the room. She followed it with another and then another, creating a pattern that felt like waves. Her fingers began to move faster, flowing naturally, each note building on the one before. The whispers stopped. People in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. The sound that came from the piano wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't loud or showy. It was soft, emotional, almost like a voice telling a story. Every rise and fall in the melody carried something deeper, something honest. The music spoke of lonely nights, quiet dreams, and unspoken words. It was a language beyond sound, something everyone could feel even if they couldn't explain it. The teacher at the front row stopped flipping through his notes. The students who had laughed earlier sat frozen. Even the sound crew forgot to move. She didn't notice any of that. Her eyes were closed the whole time. She wasn't thinking about the stage or the people watching. In her mind, she was back home, sitting by the window playing for her father again. When she reached the middle of her piece, her hands began to move faster, almost dancing across the keys. The melody turned stronger, brighter, as if it were fighting its way out of the silence that had trapped her for so long. And then, gently, she slowed down, ending on a single, soft note that seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The entire hall was still. The echo of her last note faded slowly, leaving behind a strange, heavy silence. She opened her eyes, unsure if she had done something wrong. She looked around. Faces stared back at her, but not with laughter or judgment. It was something else. Surprise. Awe. Then, as if someone had suddenly remembered how to breathe, the room erupted in applause. Loud, genuine applause that filled the space completely. Some people stood up. The teacher clapped the hardest. She sat there for a second, unable to believe it. Her fingers still hovered above the keys. She could feel her heart beating fast, and for the first time it didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. She stood up slowly and gave a small nod, not sure what else to do. The applause grew even louder. Someone shouted, "That was beautiful." As she walked off stage, a few students she'd never spoken to smiled at her, some even patting her shoulder as she passed. The same people who once ignored her now looked at her differently. Backstage, she found a quiet corner and sat down again, this time smiling softly to herself. She didn't need trophies or certificates. For her, this moment, the silence before the applause, meant more than anything. It was the moment when, finally, the world had stopped talking long enough to listen, and in that silence, her music had spoken for her. That night, after the performance, the girl walked home under the dim streetlights. The road was quiet, and the cool wind brushed against her face. Her shoes made a soft sound against the pavement as she thought about what had just happened. She couldn't believe how the whole school had clapped for her. The sound of their cheers still echoed in her ears. For the first time, she felt like she existed, not as the invisible girl who sat in the back of the class, but as someone people had truly seen. When she reached home, the lights in their small apartment were still on. Her mother was sitting by the window, half asleep with a cup of tea gone cold beside her. The moment she saw her daughter walk in, she smiled, her tired eyes lighting up. "You're back," her mother said softly. "How did it go?" The girl placed her bag down, still too full of emotion to speak. She walked over, sat beside her mother, and said in a trembling voice, "They listened." Everyone listened. Her mother reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and nodded with quiet pride. "I told you," she said gently. "When you play with your heart, people feel it. That's what makes it special." They sat together for a while in silence. The old clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the city hummed faintly, cars passing, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. But inside, there was peace. After her mother went to bed, the girl stayed awake, sitting near her keyboard. She looked at the faded keys, some yellowed, some cracked, and traced them lightly with her fingers. Every mark on it told a story. She began to play quietly, just for herself this time. The notes were soft, sleepy, almost like a whisper to the night. Her mind drifted back to her father again. She could almost hear his voice telling her to keep going, even when life felt too heavy. She had been only 8 when he passed away. It had been sudden, and everything after that felt like a blur. Her mother working extra shifts, bills piling up, and her own world becoming smaller and quieter. The piano was the only thing that stayed constant. Sometimes when her mother wasn't home, she'd sit in the dark and play for hours. She would imagine her father sitting beside her, tapping his fingers on his knee to the rhythm of the song. She never told anyone how much that piano meant to her. People saw it as just an instrument, but to her it was like a diary, a place where she poured every feeling she couldn't say aloud. At school the next day, things felt different. When she walked down the hallway, people actually turned to look. Some smiled. A few even stopped her to say, "That was amazing yesterday," or "You were incredible." She didn't know how to respond. She only smiled back quietly. It felt strange, like stepping into someone else's life. Even her teacher, who had always seemed too busy to notice her, stopped her after class and said, "You have a real gift. You should think about performing more often. Don't hide it." The words stayed in her mind the rest of the day. When she got home that afternoon, she found her mother already there, something that rarely happened. Her mother had brought some leftover pastries from work and placed them on the table. "We're celebrating," she said with a tired grin. "My daughter's first standing ovation." They both laughed softly, sharing one of the pastries between them. The laughter didn't last long, though, because reality always found its way back. Her mother's job was unstable. Some weeks were good, others were not. There were days when she came home so tired that she barely spoke, her hands rough from work. The girl wanted to help, but she was still in school. That night, while washing dishes, she heard her mother talking quietly on the phone in the other room. The voice was low, serious. She caught bits and pieces. "Rent. Late again. I'll figure it out." The girl stopped and listened, her heart heavy. She wished she could do something, anything, to make life easier for them. Later, when her mother went to sleep, she went back to her keyboard again. It was the only place she felt like she had control. She played slowly, thinking about everything. The applause, her father, their small apartment, her mother's tired eyes. The melody came out soft but full of feeling. It wasn't a song she'd heard before. It was something new, something her own. Each note felt like a promise that she would find a way to make things better. That one day she'd play not just for herself but for her mother too. A few days later, the school principal made an announcement. The talent show recordings had been posted online on the school's social page. At first, she didn't think much of it. But that evening, when she checked her phone, she saw messages from classmates. "You're trending. Look at the comments." Curious and nervous, she opened the link. Her video had hundreds of views already, and then thousands. People were commenting things like, "This gave me chills," and such pure emotion in her playing. Her heart raced as she scrolled. Someone even wrote, "She doesn't play the piano. She speaks through it." For the first time in her life, she felt proud, not just because people liked her music, but because they understood her. When her mother came home that night, she showed her the video. Her mother watched it in silence, her eyes watery. When it ended, she hugged her daughter tightly and said, "Your father would be so proud." From that night on, everything began to shift. The girl started receiving small invitations, local events, community gatherings, even a charity concert at a nearby park. People wanted her to play. At first, she hesitated. Crowds still made her nervous. But each time she sat down to play, the same magic happened. The same quiet that fell when the first note began. It didn't matter if it was 10 people or 100. The feeling was always the same. Still, despite all the small bits of attention and praise, her life at home remained humble. The rent was still due every month, and her mother still worked late. Fame didn't bring money, not yet. But it brought something more powerful: hope. One evening, as she practiced, her mother watched from the doorway. "You really love it, don't you?" she asked softly. The girl nodded. "It's the only time I feel alive," she admitted. Her mother smiled sadly. "Then never stop, no matter how hard things get." They both knew life wasn't suddenly easy just because people liked her music. But there was a quiet faith growing between them, the belief that maybe this talent, this gift, could someday open doors that had always been closed. Over the next few weeks, She started composing her own songs. She wrote little pieces inspired by the people around her, one for her mother, one for her father's memory, even one for the girl she used to be, the one who sat alone at lunch. Her teacher noticed and encouraged her to join a local youth music contest. At first she said no. She didn't want to face disappointment. But her mother convinced her otherwise. You never know who might be listening, she said, so she applied. As the contest day approached, she practiced every spare moment. Morning before school, late at night after homework, even during breaks she tapped rhythms on her desk. There were moments of frustration too. Sometimes her fingers slipped. Sometimes the notes didn't sound right. Once she even cried quietly after a long practice session, feeling like she wasn't good enough, but she didn't give up. Each mistake became a lesson. Each wrong note brought her closer to the right one. And behind every practice, there was that same image in her mind, Carol. Her father smiling beside the old piano, her mother watching proudly from the doorway, and a room full of people listening in silence as her fingers moved across the keys. She didn't know it yet, but that silence, the one that had followed her performance, would soon follow her again. Not because people didn't care, but because her music would speak louder than words ever could. She was no longer the invisible girl. She was becoming something more, not famous, not perfect, but real. Someone whose story could be felt in every note she played. The day of the big performance arrived faster than she expected. The city seemed louder that morning, as if even the wind carried excitement. Posters for the youth music contest were pasted everywhere, showing smiling faces of young performers holding guitars, violins, and microphones. She looked at them quietly, clutching her small keyboard bag. Her name wasn't on any poster. She wasn't one of the popular ones. But she was there, and that was enough for her. She had hardly slept the night before. Her mind kept replaying the melody she planned to play. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the piano keys glowing in the dark, waiting for her touch. Her hands tingled with both fear and anticipation. Her mother was the one who woke her early, making tea and a small breakfast. "Eat something before you go," she said gently. "You'll need your strength." The girl smiled weakly. "What if I make a mistake?" she whispered. Her mother shook her head. "Mistakes don't matter. Feeling does. People forget perfect notes, but they remember what touched their hearts." Those words stayed with her all morning. When they reached the venue, she was surprised at how big it was. The hall was packed with families, judges, cameras, and bright lights. She had never played anywhere this large before. Her heart beat faster just looking at the stage. Performers gathered backstage, some laughing, some tuning instruments, others scrolling through their phones. She stood quietly in a corner, holding her sheet of handwritten notes. Her hands were slightly shaking. A tall boy with a guitar smiled at her. "First time?" he asked kindly. She nodded. "Yes," he grinned. "Don't worry. Everyone's nervous before they start. But once you begin, it all disappears." She smiled back faintly. He was right, maybe. When she played, everything else usually faded away. It was just her and the music. As her turn grew closer, she peeked through the curtains. The audience looked like a sea of faces. Parents holding cameras, children waving, judges whispering to each other. The lights were blinding, reflecting off the shiny piano at center stage. She swallowed hard. It looked far more intimidating than she imagined. One by one, the other performers went up. A young violinist played a lively tune. A small choir sang in perfect harmony. A dancer spun gracefully to soft music. The audience clapped politely after each act. When the announcer finally called her name, something inside her went quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, full of tension and calm at the same time. She took a deep breath and walked out slowly. The lights were hotter than she expected. They made her skin feel warm and the air seemed heavier. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The announcer smiled at her and whispered, "Take your time." She nodded, then turned toward the piano. It gleamed under the stage lights, beautiful and intimidating. She took a seat on the bench and placed her hands gently on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. The audience waited. A quiet cough echoed from somewhere in the back. A chair creaked. Someone whispered. And then she began to play. The first note rang out softly, almost fragile but clear. The sound floated through the hall, touching every corner. Then came another note and another. slowly at first as if she were testing the air, then flowing together like a river finding its rhythm. Her fingers moved gracefully, but her face stayed calm. Her eyes were closed. She didn't need to see the keys, she knew them by heart. Each note carried a piece of her story. The quiet afternoons alone, the long nights practicing, the memory of her father's smile, her mother's tired hands, it all came alive in that melody. The judges leaned forward, whispering softly to each other. The audience stopped moving. As she played, something shifted in the room. It was no longer about a contest. It wasn't about trophies or applause. It was something deeper, something pure. The music spoke to everyone in a way words never could. The melody rose higher, stronger, like a voice calling out from a place beyond fear. It wasn't perfect. One note came slightly late, another too soft. But no one noticed. They were caught in the emotion behind it. Then came the quiet part, where her fingers slowed, touching the keys like raindrops. It was the sound of longing and hope all at once. People in the front row wiped their eyes. The tall boy with the guitar stood at the side of the stage, frozen, watching her in awe. Even the stage crew, usually busy adjusting lights, had stopped to listen. And then she reached the end, a soft, fading note that hung in the air longer than anyone expected. For a full 5 seconds, there was complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had paused to listen. Then, without warning, the room exploded with applause. Loud, echoing claps filled the hall, joined by cheers and whistles. The sound was overwhelming. The girl looked up, eyes wide in disbelief. Her heart pounded faster. She stood slowly and gave a small bow, her hands trembling. The audience stood, a standing ovation. Her mother, sitting in the middle rows, had tears streaming down her face. She clapped the hardest, whispering softly, "That's my daughter." The judges exchanged looks of amazement. One of them even stood and smiled warmly at her. Backstage, people surrounded her. The tall boy grinned. "That was incredible," he said. "You made everyone feel something real." She smiled shyly. "Thank you," she whispered. Her mother hugged her tightly as soon as she came down the steps. "You did it," she said through tears. "You made them listen." For the rest of the evening, people kept coming up to congratulate her. Organizers, other contestants, even strangers who had been moved by her performance. Some wanted to take pictures. Some just wanted to shake her hand. But when she finally sat alone again, away from the crowd, she took a deep breath and smiled to herself. She remembered the lonely days when she thought no one cared, the nights she played in the dark with only her father's memory to guide her. All of it had led to this moment. Later that night, after everything was over, she and her mother walked home together under the cool night sky. The stars looked brighter than usual. She carried a small certificate in her hand. Not the first prize, but a special recognition award for emotional excellence. To her, it meant more than any trophy ever could. Her mother squeezed her hand as they walked. "You see," she said softly, "you don't need to win to be remembered." The girl nodded, smiling quietly. When they reached home, she placed the certificate on the wall above her old keyboard. She sat down, her fingers brushing over the cracked keys. For a moment, she thought about how far she'd come, from playing in a small apartment to performing in front of hundreds. She pressed one key gently, then another. The sound was softer than the grand piano she had played on stage, but to her it felt more real. She closed her eyes and played again. Not for the crowd this time, not for recognition, but for herself. The melody was calm, peaceful, full of gratitude. She thought about her father's words once more. It's not about perfect notes. It's about what you feel when you play. Now she understood what he meant completely, because when she played that night, she didn't just perform, she spoke. She spoke to the hearts of everyone in that room, without saying a single word. And that, she realized, was the real magic of music. As the final note faded into the quiet of their apartment, her mother stood by the door, smiling. "You're going to change your life with those fingers," she said softly. The girl looked up, her eyes shining, and replied, "Maybe I already did." The day after her big performance, the school felt different. She walked through the halls, and instead of the usual whispers or glances of indifference, she noticed people looking at her with curiosity, admiration, and something she had never experienced before: respect. Even the teachers seemed surprised. One of them, usually hurried and distracted, stopped to smile and say, "You were incredible yesterday. Truly incredible." Her classmates, who had once ignored her, now whispered among themselves, sometimes glancing in her direction. She didn't know what to make of it. She had always been invisible, and suddenly it felt like she was being pulled into the center of everyone's attention. That afternoon, the principal called her to the office. Her heart raced as she walked down the familiar hallway. Normally, she had avoided the office, but today, she stepped in with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. The principal smiled warmly. "Your performance yesterday, it moved everyone," he said. "We've shared the video online, and it's been getting attention. People want to hear more from you, not just in school, but outside too." She blinked, trying to understand his words. The thought that strangers might actually want to hear her play felt strange and exciting at the same time. "Don't let it scare you," he continued. "Your music has something that words cannot explain. Keep playing, keep sharing." After leaving the office, she felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. She had always played for herself, or sometimes for her mother, but now she realized that her music could touch many hearts, even strangers. When she returned to class, she found a small group of students waiting near the piano room. They had been watching her online performance. "You played amazing," one of them said. "I couldn't stop watching." She smiled shyly, nodding. "Thank you." Another student added, "Your music, it's different. It's not just notes, it's like it tells a story." The girl felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever described her playing like that. That evening, she sat alone in her small apartment with her mother. Her mother had prepared dinner, but they barely spoke, both lost in their own thoughts. The girl took her keyboard from the corner and placed it carefully on the table. She started, playing softly, letting her fingers glide across the keys. The melody wasn't anything she had played before. It came from her heart, a combination of all the emotions she had felt the past few days: fear, joy, pride, and hope. As she played, her mother watched quietly from the doorway, a gentle smile on her tired face. She understood without words what her daughter was feeling. After a while, the girl stopped and looked at the keyboard. She realized how far she had come. She had started playing in a quiet room, afraid of what anyone would think. Now her music had reached people she had never met, touching hearts in ways she had never imagined. Over the next few days, the attention she received continued. People from nearby schools reached out to invite her to perform. A local music teacher offered her free lessons, impressed by her natural talent. Even her classmates, who had once teased her, seemed to be looking at her differently. She felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. She wanted to play for others, but the thought of performing again made her nervous. What if she didn't meet expectations? What if the silence she experienced during her first performance disappeared, replaced by disappointment or judgment? Her mother noticed the hesitation. "You can't control what others think," she said gently. "You can only give them your music, that's enough." The girl nodded. She knew her mother was right. The only thing she could control was what she played and how she played it. That weekend, she was invited to perform at a small local event. The audience wasn't as big as the school auditorium, but she still felt the familiar tension in her chest. Her mother held her hand as they walked into the hall, offering silent support. When she sat at the piano, she closed her eyes. She remembered the first time she played for the school, the moment the room had gone silent, and how that silence had felt like magic. She wanted to feel that again, not for applause, but for connection. As she pressed the first key, the room seemed to hold its breath. The melody was soft, tentative at first, but soon it grew stronger, more confident. She poured every feeling into the music, the quiet moments at home, the long nights of practice, the memories of her father, and the hope she carried for the future. By the middle of her performance, the audience was completely captivated. People leaned forward, listening intently. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. She didn't need to see their faces. She could feel their attention, their emotions blending with hers. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. It was not just a performance. It was a conversation between her heart and the hearts of everyone listening. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, soft and delicate. For a moment, the room was completely silent. No applause, no whispers, just the echo of the last note. Then, slowly, the audience began to clap. It started softly, then grew louder, until the hall was filled with genuine appreciation. She opened her eyes and smiled, tears threatening to spill. She realized that the silence had returned, not as fear, but as attention, as connection. The magic she felt the first time was still there, and it was even stronger now. Afterward, people approached her, congratulating her, praising her music, asking her to perform again. She felt a strange mixture of pride and humility. She knew her talent was just one part of the story. The hard work, the lonely practice hours, and the support of her mother were all essential too. That night, back at home, she sat at her keyboard again. She played softly, letting the notes fill the small apartment. Her mother listened, smiling quietly. "You're changing things," her mother said gently. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who hears you." The girl nodded. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew her music had power. Power to make people stop, to make them feel, to make them listen. In the following weeks, she continued to practice diligently. Each day she discovered new ways to express herself through music. She composed small pieces inspired by the people she met, the experiences she had, and the emotions she felt. Even at school, she noticed subtle changes. Students who once ignored her now asked for advice on music or simply said hello. Teachers smiled at her in the hallway, recognizing her talent and dedication. The girl who had once been invisible was slowly becoming known for her music, but with recognition came responsibility. She realized that every time she played, people expected something extraordinary. That pressure sometimes made her anxious, but she learned to focus on the music itself, rather than the audience. One afternoon, while practicing in her room, she paused and thought about the journey so far. From lonely evenings at the old keyboard, learning by ear, to performing in front of hundreds, every step had been challenging yet rewarding. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, for her mother, for the opportunities, and for the gift of music itself. Her mother entered quietly, carrying a small cup of tea. "You've grown so much," she said softly. "I see it in the way you play and the way people respond. Don't ever forget how special you are." The girl smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. She realized that the silence that once made her feel invisible had become a source of strength. It was a reminder that when she played, people listened, not just to the notes, but to her heart. From that moment on, she played with even more confidence and emotion. Each performance was an opportunity to share her story, to connect with others, and to honor the journey that had brought her to this point. She knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, mistakes and nerves, but she also knew that the music inside her was stronger than any fear. Every note, every melody was a step forward, a bridge between her world and the world of those who listened, and so the girl continued to play, letting her fingers move across the keys with intention and feeling. The silence that followed each note was no longer empty or frightening. It was full of possibility, full of attention, full of connection. It was in that silence that she found her power. It was in that silence that her music truly spoke. And in that silence, she knew that she had found her place in the world. The morning air was crisp and clear as she walked to school, her backpack light on her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. People passed by, some nodding, some whispering excitedly, but none of it made her nervous. She had grown used to attention, though it still surprised her how quickly things had changed. The news of her performance had spread beyond the school. The video of her playing had been shared by local community pages, and soon, strangers were writing to the school just to praise her. Teachers told her that even parents from nearby towns had watched it and were talking about how moving her music was. At first, it felt strange. She had never imagined anyone outside her small circle noticing her. But now there was no turning back. Her life had shifted quietly, yet completely. During the morning assembly, the principal called her up. Her heart thumped as she walked to the stage, wondering what this time could be. The principal smiled warmly and said, "This young musician has shown us the power of dedication and heart. Her performance has touched not just our school, but people all over our town. Today we celebrate her." A round of applause filled the hall. She felt her cheeks warm, and she lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. Teachers and students alike were smiling at her with genuine pride. Even the students who had once ignored her or whispered behind her back clapped and cheered. After assembly, her music teacher handed her an envelope. Inside was an invitation to a regional music competition. Her hands trembled as she read it. She had never performed outside the school before. The thought of it was exciting yet terrifying. Her mother, who had come to the school to support her, squeezed her hand. "You've come this far," she said gently. "Don't be afraid. Just play with your heart, as you always do." That afternoon, she returned home and sat at her old keyboard. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She thought about the days when no one listened, when she played alone in her room, practicing for hours with no audience, no applause, and no recognition. Those lonely days had shaped her, taught her resilience, and built the foundation for everything she could do now. As she began to play, she let herself feel every emotion, the fear, the hope, the joy, the quiet pride. The melody flowed naturally, expressing what words never could. The notes carried a story of struggle, of quiet perseverance, of a dream that refused to fade even in the darkest times. Her mother watched silently, proud and emotional. She remembered the nights when she had worried about her daughter's future, the long hours of work she endured just to keep the apartment warm and food on the table. And now, seeing her daughter's talent recognized, she felt a deep sense of relief and hope. The next few days were a whirlwind. Invitations arrived from local schools, community centers, and small concert halls. People wanted to hear her play, to feel the emotion she could convey with just her fingers on the keys. She accepted some invitations and declined others, careful to balance school, practice, and the small, quiet moments she still needed. Each time she played for a new audience, the silence that followed the first note came naturally. People stopped talking, leaning forward, drawn into the music as if it had a life of its own. It was the same silence she had first experienced at the school talent show, heavy, full of attention, and alive with emotion. She began to realize something important. It wasn't just her skill that mattered, but the feeling behind every note. That connection, the one people experienced in silence, was what made her music powerful. It didn't matter if she made a small mistake or forgot a note. The heart in her performance was what people remembered. One evening, while practicing a new piece she had composed, she received a message from a local music academy. They wanted to meet her, to discuss a possible scholarship and mentorship. She read it over and over, unable to believe it was real. Her mother, standing behind her, whispered, "This is the beginning of something wonderful. You've earned this." The academy meeting was intimidating. She had never played in front of professional musicians before. But when she sat at the piano and began to play, the world around her fell away. Her fingers moved naturally, guided by years of practice, memory, and emotion. When she finished, the teachers and mentors exchanged impressed looks. They told her she had a rare gift and offered her a place in their program immediately. It was the first time she realized that her talent could open doors she had only dreamed about. But more than that, she understood that her music could touch people in ways nothing else could. The notes she played were not just sounds. They were stories, emotions, and messages that words could never fully express. Back at home that night, she sat with her mother, looking at the small certificate of acceptance she had received from the academy. "Do you think I can do this?" she asked softly. Her mother took her hand and smiled. "You've already done it. You just didn't know it yet." In the following weeks, she balanced school, practice, and preparation for her first academy sessions. Each day she discovered new techniques, new ways to express herself, and new stories to tell through music. Every lesson brought her closer to understanding not just the piano, but herself. Her mother continued to be her quiet support. She listened to every note, encouraged her when she doubted herself, and celebrated every small victory. The bond between them grew stronger, built on shared struggles, quiet sacrifices, and the joy of seeing a dream come to life. Word of her talent spread even further. Local newspapers featured stories about the girl whose music could silence a room. Community leaders invited her to perform at events. Even strangers recognized her in the street, smiling and saying, "I've heard you play. Your music is beautiful." Each encounter reminded her that her journey had started in quiet, lonely moments at home, and now her music had reached far beyond anything she had imagined. She felt both humbled and proud, but she never let the attention distract her from why she played. Every note, every practice session, every performance was a conversation between her and the world. She played to express herself, to honor her father's memory, to share the hope and emotion she carried within her. And then came the day she had been dreaming of, a large local concert where she would perform with other young musicians. The auditorium was packed, the lights bright, and the audience full of people who had come specifically to hear her. Her heart raced, but she remembered all the times she had practiced alone, all the times she had played in silence, and all the moments when no one had listened. She walked onto the stage, took a deep breath, and sat at the grand piano. When she pressed the first key, the room fell silent instantly. The same silence she had felt at the school talent show, the same quiet that had captivated the audience every time she played, returned. Her fingers moved with confidence and grace. The music flowed naturally, telling stories of her past, her struggles, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. Each note carried a piece of her soul, and the audience could feel it. They leaned forward, some with eyes closed, others with tears streaming down their faces. When the last note faded, the silence lingered for a few precious seconds. Then the applause erupted. It was louder than anything she had experienced before. Standing ovations, cheers, and shouts of encouragement filled the auditorium. She smiled, tears in her eyes, bowing deeply. The moment was overwhelming, but it was also a culmination of everything she had worked for: the quiet practices, the support of her mother, the love for her father, and the courage to share her music with the world. After the concert, reporters and music enthusiasts approached her, asking about her story, her inspiration, and her future plans. She spoke softly but confidently, sharing how music had always been her escape and how it had become her voice. From that day on, her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. Scholarships, mentorships, and performance opportunities opened doors she had only dreamed about. She traveled to new places, met other musicians, and continued to grow as an artist. But more than fame or recognition, the most important change was within her. She had learned to believe in herself, to trust her talent, and to understand the power of music. She had discovered that when she played with heart, people listened, not just to the notes, but to her story. Even as her life became busier and more public, she never forgot the small apartment where it all began, the old keyboard, and the quiet evenings spent playing for herself and her mother. Those moments had shaped her, grounded her, and reminded her of why she played, and so, every time she performed, no matter the audience size or setting, she remembered the silence that had first welcomed her music. That silence had become her strength, her connection to others, and her reminder that true art comes from the heart. Through all the applause, attention, and opportunities, she remained the same quiet girl who had once sat alone, dreaming of a world that would listen. Only now the world did listen, and every time her fingers moved across the keys, the room went silent, a silence full of respect, wonder, and the shared understanding of her music's power. She had found her place, her voice, and her path, and she knew that wherever life took her, her music would always guide the way.